Chris. Chris, how are you doing? Thank
Good.
you
How
for
are you?
being thank you for being on the video, talking to us about cloud, about just technology and all the just everything that's happening.
Yeah. Thanks
The
for having me.
do you want to just intro yourself? Just talk about your background and what you're up to right now before we start talking.
Yeah. My name is Chris Healer, formerly CEO of The Molecule. I've started a new company called eyelash.ai. Not a fancy website up yet, but we're getting there. Um, Eyelash is moving. It's basically transmuting the the things you learn in visual effects into other industries. So that includes photogrammetry for architecture and for real estate, for installation design, for museums. Um, you'd be very surprised how I think the visual effects industry is pretty insulated. It's a tight knit group, and you take those skills and put them out in the world as something for other groups to use. There's a lot of opportunity out there. Um, we're looking at a project in Washington D.C. For a political group that wants to basically show 360 uh, 360 views. I can't say all the company names,
Perfectly fine.
um, but it's going to involve a lot of photogrammetry and a lot of real-time data, and it wants to be, if they're going to spend $10 million on a single room for 360 projection, it's like, yeah, they're going to spend some money on how the images look and how that, how the presentation works. And taking everything we have from visual effects, um, it's a good offering. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So that's Eyelash is pushing into that space. I mean, I think in general, visual effects wants to move into a real time space of some kind. It's going to take a while because I think the expectations are very high because of feature film and television, and there's still like a gap between a video game and a feature film.
Hmm.
But it's getting closer every day, and you know it. So
Yeah. So actually, we were gonna center the interview around cloud, but actually that sounds way more interesting. So for now, let's talk about that. How much of that do you think is motivated by visual effects just wanting to branch out? Because to be like, if we're gonna be perfectly candid, like the film, TV, commercial space is pretty, it's tight and it's hard to kind of break out of it. Or how much of that is real demand that's actually out there where, these needs are not being met by other people? Does that question
I
make
think you have um, try to find a starting place here. So I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately. Next Generation.
sense?
Let's start there. And you look at the visual effects, and there's a significant quantity of visual effects per show. But I think the storytelling is great, the editing is great, the actors and the characters, they're all great. The visual effects, it's close, but it's also, that was what, 20, 25 years ago. And maybe there's 20 or 30 shots per episode. Now you've got, the easy targets, Game of Thrones or whatever. But if you look at even Queen's Gambit, it's like there's a lot of visual effects, like hundreds of shots per episode. And the expectation is that it looks absolutely real. And even you and I would have a hard time telling what is a visual effect or not.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the bar. You have to hit that bar. It's not okay to have cheesy, low poly CG stuff, or to have a low frame rate, or to have every frame must be perfect,
Hmm.
um, and that's the expectation. I mean, because you know I think I've said it before, not in this interview, but but just in general, it's like the ultimate test is show it to your mom. What does your mom say? And if your mom looks at it and she's like, that looks weird, that's one thing. But if she's like, I had no idea, then that's another thing.
Yeah.
So, uh, so we want to get to that place. I mean, what I'm finding is that, um, the graphics workflow in Unity or Unreal, it's it can be similar to Nuke, kind of, or Touch Designer is a good example, or there's another one called Disguise, which I think is a little less famous. Maybe you haven't heard of it.
Hmm.
It should be because it's freaking awesome. But I mean, there's these pipelines coming out that are as capable or will be as capable as Nuke uh, very soon.
Okay. And but that's for real-time CG, or you're comparing it to Nuke, as in like it also can do like 2D um, kind of
Well,
operations.
I'm
Like,
talking about 2D operations with some CG stuff in it,
mhm.
but it's really, like CG is very important, but what's most important is what gets to the screen at the end of the day, and that almost always happens through some compositing software. Like that is the last. Like what's really critical is the last thing that touches the shot before you consider it final with a capital F and push it downstream.
Yeah,
So your compositing software is critical.
yeah. So let's transition that to cloud. So in visual effects and post-production in general, with COVID happening, but even before COVID, there's a lot of movement to cloud work. There's a lot of movement to real time, like you were saying, but there's also, things are getting moved to the cloud. They're getting kind of decentralized. Is that a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What's
What do you
happening?
think? I think it's the best. I think it's the best possible thing.
Nice, awesome. Why?
I think, well, number one, I think that people naturally gravitate towards groups of like 4 or 5 people, and I think, especially for workflows like visual effects, like a group of 4 or 5 people is excellent and awesome. And a remote workflow allows that, where they can work together in whatever size group they want or not. They can all sit in the same room together or not. They can use same software or different software. They can come up with whatever wacky naming conventions they want. Like there's all kinds of stuff that comes along with creating your kind of ideal work group and like nurturing that, like
Hmm.
um, it doesn't necessarily work so well to sit in a large room of people and expect everyone to want the same thing. And what you end up with smaller groups is people can play their strengths, people can do what they're really good at, and then you can find different groups for other things that they're not so good at. So it's like, you have one group that's really good at fire or ice or water or whatever. Okay, you have another group that's good at uh, match moving or paint or roto.
Hmm.
You have another group that's really good at color or uh, roto, like advanced roto paint is not the same as prep at all. Like if you have to
Yeah.
paint out some complex thing. um, and so the cloud what the cloud allows is kind of a democratization where people who are good at one thing or another can put themselves out there and they can be hired for it, and there you go.
Yeah.
What the cloud also does is decouple the hardware that they're sitting on from the hardware that is doing the processing. It also makes it to where they're not necessarily, ideally so concerned with what is installed on the machine that they're working on. Obviously, you need some administrator or some smart person to set up a thing. But once a thing is set up, uh, you can push that out to 100 people.
Yeah. Is
Uh,
so what would you so you're obviously like a big proponent of it in terms of democratization. So what is the pitfall to this? Because there's going to be something. Like what's the biggest issue that you
the
think we're going to
biggest,
encounter?
it's two things. It's two things. It's number one, security, right? And number two is um, storage cost and machine hour cost. So to talk about security for a second,
Hmm.
it's it's very tricky to make sure that who is logged into a network is the correct and allowed person, and that they're not doing weird stuff.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like I'm looking at you right now. You may have a big, fat, fancy computer, but I can't see it because the camera's pointing outward.
Yeah.
But you may have some cool software on there that you hacked or cracked or whatever. Don't smile. And and you may produce some great results in something. But are we gonna? Does it make sense for you to have footage for a project on your local machine and then to push the results of that back to the network? Because what you want is this central network where nothing can penetrate, right?
Hmm.
It's nothing illegal can come in, nothing is leaked out, and that's basically like your guarantee to the network that um, it sounds exotic and weird, but it's like, are you using vacation photos, as backplates?
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like a simple thing, but I mean, if you do it in the wrong way, like
It's
someone
gonna.
will, they'll sue you,
Yeah. It'll pop
or
up.
if you download something and download a piece of footage to your machine, use unlicensed software, and push it back to a network. There's a lot of softwares now that use kind of uh, basically invisible watermarks, so
Hmm.
they can unwrap your image and find out if you use their software in a fully licensed way.
Yeah. The
And yeah, it's a thing.
That's a thing. Practically speaking, what seems to be the solution for that now? Because people are obviously working in the cloud in some capacity, and either with
The
private
solution
infrastructure.
is you work in the cloud 100%, and you trust your network administrators, and the side effect is that it's really annoying that, for instance, from a screen share, you can't just drag a window or drag a file to your desktop, do some
Hmm.
stuff, and then drag it back.
Yeah.
Like, you should consider your local machine to be basically a window to the world, but not use your local machine.
Hmm.
Um,
The
that's that's really an important, like, because I think a lot of artists work at home and play on their machine, and they get jazzed about their machine, and that's cool. That's awesome. But like in a cloud context, you should consider, your local machine to be just a shell.
Yeah. In case you're wondering, that's actually what I have. I just have like an NUC machine. It's like this big.
There you go.
So I don't have a fancy machine, and that is on purpose.
Yeah.
Um, the private infrastructure or infrastructure as a service, what do you think makes more sense, especially with security? Because I know that there is some industry consensus, but there is some more philosophical consensus on whether or not it's better to have private infrastructure that you control and that people log into, and then that's your network, right? And it's inside a building that you control, that you have key cards for, or if it's better to trust
Right.
Google or Amazon, or any of those guys.
Right. And you're leading to my second point. Um, I mean, you're calling it private infrastructure. I would call it on-prem resources as opposed to
Yeah.
cloud resources. I mean, the thing you have to remember is that storage and infrastructure is very expensive for any company, and they end up paying for it for a long time. So you want to get use out of that. Number one. Number two, um, putting things on the cloud. I think on day one it works. I think, um, 6 or 8 months later, when you find out that you're still paying for a project that no one wanted to clean up, um, that's kind of a big deal. And then the egress cost, which Amazon has, and I don't think they're ever going to let go of that. There's other
Yeah.
groups out there, Backblaze or a handful of others, uh, where egress costs not so much. But I mean, it's like if you put 50 terabytes up, okay, use it. But to download that 50 terabytes might be more expensive than you expected.
Yeah.
So to keep things on-prem and work out a workflow where uh, I think it revolves around this concept of like, what is there a golden master of the project? Like, it's a really important question because increasingly I find, I have some files on my personal Google Drive, some files on my laptop, some files on a hard drive, some files on a kind of company project folder, and does it ever actually get assembled into one thing?
Mm-hmm.
Just due to the cloud flowing nature of whatever, and we're still trying to work that out. Like,
Yeah.
um, how do you how do you guarantee that if a studio is requesting effectively a final golden master, like, is it all in there? And fortunately, most of the time they don't actually ever need to go back that far, or if they do, they don't complain that much. But still, just as a kind of as a tech person and like just someone who's concerned with it, it's like, how do you assemble all that? And I think a very good way is to have an on-prem, you know, golden master
Yeah.
of some kind, because in a small organization it might be you that copies all the stuff, but in a larger organization, uh, they no one knows what is they're going to copy what's there. They're not going to assemble it from a bunch of different sources.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. The Where do you think, so we're talking about hardware. Do you see a comp like the Foundry or, Autodesk or anybody like that moving their software services into like a cloud environment, right? Like into, like a browser-based software, right? I know the
I
Foundry had I forget Athera or something like that. There was
that
something like that.
Athera, yeah, which unfortunately they've kind of officially put on pause.
Mm.
Um, there's Stratus Core, there's Paperspace, there's what's the other one? Starts with a B. There's a
Bebop,
few out there. Which one?
Bebop.
Bebop. Yep,
Yeah,
there you go.
there's that one. There's So are they
I think
virtualizing? Yeah, keep going.
I think that 2 or 3 years from now, that's going to be that's everything.
That's the game.
Like, you won't ever install anything on your machine. You're requesting access to remote work, remote resources. Um, it's tricky. I mean, I don't know how much you're into code, for instance, but if you look at the developments that are happening in Qt, for instance, which in my
Hmm.
opinion is one of the strongest, biggest players right now.
Hmm.
Because if you look, like, Nuke is essentially a processing engine with an interface attached to it.
Yeah.
That interface is written in Qt.
Okay.
Maya was written using old Mosaic stuff, and Maya has a very long history. At some point, they bought the bullet and or bit the bullet and rewrote the interface in Qt. So that was probably 5, 8 years ago, something like that.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Mocha is written in Qt. Like, you look down the line, like, all of these things, what's actually getting to the screen is written in Qt.
Hmm.
Um, and they have some very clever tools for publishing software using WebGL or kind of native web components. And what you're going to see is that, yeah, I'm sure they're already working on it now, but the people at Adobe are going to rewrite the Photoshop interface or adapt the Photoshop interface to work natively in the browser. And we've already seen it with Clara.io, and
Yeah.
there's a handful of others where it's like it is a perfectly capable 3D interface or 2D interface for graphics stuff. Um, the hard part is just that I think the expectation, like I was talking about before, the expectation of the viewer is very high for visual effects. The expectation of the user of VFX software is very high. So you can't put out on day one, a crappy representation of Photoshop. Like they're going to expect
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, they're on it, and it's going to happen. And just even more philosophically, it's like I don't understand why anyone writes a native app for anything. Like,
Yeah.
why is there a native app for your phone? Why is there a native app for your machine? Because all you need to do is get it to your screen. And at this point, especially with 5G coming, it's like
Yeah.
the connection, the network connection is potentially faster than, it's not going to be faster than talking to the local device, but it's the you know the potential power on the other side of that bridge is way greater than whatever your local device could
Yeah.
ever offer.
Yeah. The cost, cost to benefit ratio is just much better. It's basically just,
Right.
yeah. What do you think the implications on on an industry level? What are the implications on the model, the industry model, if things move that way, right? Like, how do you
I
think that's going to
think,
translate into how they charge for software or how we charge for work, or do you think any of that changes?
well, it's really interesting. So I've kind of made a lot of friends with the Foundry over the years. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they renamed to Foundry, so it's not the Foundry.
Oh, well,
And then people come and go, and you talk to people years later, and it's just really interesting. And they're one of they're really holding out on like the concept of uh, usage based licensing. I
mm-hmm.
think Adobe and Autodesk have started to embrace it. Um, I think in a cloud context, and I mean it's funny because it's like you talk to, because I talk to Autodesk, I talk to Adobe, and I talk to Foundry, and I talk to them, every couple weeks about one thing or another. Something comes up,
Yeah,
and they're like, "Yeah, you're right. Yeah, usage-based licensing makes a lot of sense, but we'll never do it. We'll never do it in the sense of price per second or price per minute."
okay,
And I think there's a little bit of game of chicken where it's like once someone kind of cracks the egg on that, uh, once someone knocks over the first domino and finds a model, because we saw the same thing before, where it's like, 10 years ago, you had to buy a license and install it. Well, no, 15 years ago, you had to buy a dongle, plug it into a machine. Then
mm-hmm.
later, cryptography got farther along, and you had to get a license key and install it on your machine.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can install the software all you want, but you have to be connected to the internet and have your account up to date, and you pay for it, and then it authenticates your session that way.
Yeah,
And so the next step is you don't even install it in the first place, and you're just logging into a site.
yeah,
Um, but the,
so,
the the pay cycle is such that they don't. It kind of comes down to if they have to bill your credit card 10 times a day, that's terrible. So it has to aggregate into a monthly payment or something like that. And if you're invalidated or revalidated or have problems, or you're on an airplane and
mm-hmm.
you don't have internet connection, but you did pay for it. So there's a lot of like
Yeah,
little complications in there.
the
You're in
liabilities change. Yeah,
Mumbai and your internet is crappy, and
Yeah.
but you still are a legitimate user. So there's some stuff to work through,
Mhm.
but I think it's going to drift towards, and I say this from a software developer standpoint, where it's like I would love to charge you 4 cents per minute to use my software. I mean, it sounds selfish, but it's just like, yeah, because
Yeah.
if you're producing software that's really useful, someone should pay for it. But if you're asleep or if you go from 50 users to one user, like you're not using the software. So like, there's got to
Yeah.
be a little give and take there.
Mhm.
And I think it's going. I hope it's going to drift in that direction where you pay by the minute or pay by the second, or if you want to create a coefficient of some kind where you pay by minute times CPUs or CPU speed or
Yeah.
something like that, or GPU.
Mm.
Um,
The so what do you think is so that kind of all of that makes sense. I mean, to me, that all of that makes sense, and it does seem to be where things are going. The thing I like to do in these interviews is I like to see if I can get people to prognosticate even further. What do you
mm,
think is even past that, right? Like if you had to play a fortune teller, you know, and you had to predict
well,
2040 or whatever, because people like to do that. They like to
yeah. I mean,
the
I'll tell you what I where I want to get to.
okay,
Just with the software that we've been writing
okay,
is uh, I want to if you take the concept of like your local machine out of the equation, right?
mm-hmm,
So you're just logged into a web interface, and behind that is some number of nodes that are doing processing,
yeah,
and so some number of those nodes might be doing Nuke, some might be Arnold, some might be Houdini, some might be anything, Mesh Lab, like any random thing that you're thinking of.
mm-hmm,
Um, I can see a world where so I don't know what version of Nuke did you start on?
5, I
5.
think, yeah, that's
Okay, so
but
it's pretty close to where I started. I started around like 4.7, and they somewhere around that time they introduced the concept of 3D nodes.
mm-hmm,
They may have existed in a more primitive way before that, but like so in the Nuke tree you have a comp node, and then all of a sudden it's 3D, and then all of a sudden you put a scanline render and you're back to 2D, right?
yeah,
So it
mm-hmm,
goes 2D, 3D, 2D. There you go. So there's only two types, 2D or 3D.
yeah,
I would envision that some number of years from now, it'll be like Nuke, Arnold, Houdini, After Effects, Premiere, where the node types just freely skip between each other, and maybe you log into one piece or another to make a change, but it's all a long flowing thing.
yeah,
And it's you can call it 2D or 3D, you can call it an edit or a like it the naming gets funky.
yeah. It's more
Um,
abstract. Like it doesn't really it doesn't matter essentially what you really call it. It's just what it does. The
right, and then within, you may have like a Mocha branch, and you've got, say, a crew in India like doing Roto,
mm-hmm,
but your downstream artists are seeing those updates more or less real time, while your 3D guys are tweaking XYZ, and they have commit points where they're like, because in 3D or anything, it's like it's totally messed up, totally messed up. Okay, here's good. We want to present that, and then messed up, messed up, messed up, present that. And so you're posting, the same way as Git repositories work. You're posting a thing that is worth posting, and then all of your teammates who are or are not sitting next to you somewhere in the world or whatever
mm-hmm,
are receiving those updates, but it's kind of software agnostic. So you end up with a really exciting marketplace where, like I really admire Mocha, and I seeing all the updates they've been putting out with like um, complex mesh matching, and it's not just planar tracking anymore. It's like a lot more stuff. So it's
Yeah.
just like, okay, well, why would I, if I need to map a thing onto a thing, why would I figure out how to do it in Nuke? Why can't I just branch out to Mocha, do that, pull it back into my, it just kind of makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. No, I see. I see. I kind of see what you mean. You ever hear of Notch?
Yeah,
Notch. The what you're describing kind of reminds me of Notch because Notch kind of tries to do that where it's not, it does all sorts of effects, but it also just takes in any kind of source. Really,
right.
like that's kind of their game is that they're trying to, MIDI inputs and like also other video inputs, and it just does whatever it can to those inputs. So that's kind of how I imagine what you're describing.
Right. Notch is on the same, Notch, uh, Disguise, and Touch Designer,
Hmm.
very image conduit to a less extent, but that's that category of like real time rendering stuff that contemplates accepting input that is not necessarily from a disk. It might be motion capture or some other camera positioning or like whatever.
Hmm.
So I really think that I hope to see that direction happen, and that's really what inspires me kind of day to day is like I don't care how you make your sausage. Give me a node output in my
Yeah.
tree, and then I call you up and I'm like, hey, dude, make the thing more red or make it faster or make it slower. It's like
Yeah.
whatever you got going on, that's fine. Do it. Give me a plug and let me take it and run with it. And I
Hmm.
think you multiply that, using the cloud on a large scale, and you've really got something cool.
Nice. Awesome. We're starting to hit our 30-minute mark. That's usually when I try to wind it down. The When do you think, do you want to talk about eyelash more? When do you think you guys are going to have something that we can look at? I'm just
Uh,
curious, even just for myself, I'm just curious to see like what what you guys are up to.
yeah, I mean, I think our official website I hope to have up in a month or two. I mean, we have a lot of great projects to put in there, and I want to make it a little special in the sense of it's super nerdy, but I think to me it's valuable. Like if you view it on a mobile device, can you will it be accelerometer sensitive? And if you view it on a stereoscopic monitor, can you put it in stereoscopic mode? Like I think there's something, it's pretty ambitious, but
Hmm.
I think there's a value there to, again, going back to half an hour ago, showing it to your mom, she's gonna be like, "Oh, that's great, you do some good work." But I think to the person like you, for instance, to realize, oh my God, there's an anaglyph mode, and you can put on anaglyph classes. I think that has a value. So,
Hmm.
that's something that I'm working on now, as well as just getting kind of the rest of our network up. Um, one of the this is interesting. I think one of the mistake is the wrong word, but a contemplation. Uh, so we I've been building the network so that there's a cloud component. I'm pointing right there at my office. There's that component. There's mobile user. Like we're building it from the ground up to be very distributed, and um, so it takes a minute to like I really want to build it right because what I've found, because I've kind of built a lot of offices, all mistakes are kind of made on day one, or not day one necessarily, but all mistakes are made in pre-production. That's a nicer
Yeah.
way to say it.
Yeah. That's a good
So
one.
we're building the network context in a different way than the molecule is built, and I hope it's more robust for kind of what I believe in, which is this distributed multi-user workflow. Um,
Okay.
so I will definitely hit you up when the new website is up and when we have things to show. And
Hmm.
it may be weird. It may be that I send you the link and you control the website. We'll see.
I'm excited now. I'm gonna be refreshing the eyelash.ai. I'm gonna be refreshing it every once in a while to see if you made progress. What is the count up about? The
It's the
number?
number. It's the Unix timestamp, which is the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970, which is the effectively the start of time in the world of Unix. Just
Nice.
Google it. Google
I
Unix
will.
epoch, Unix epoch, and you will see that that is the time. It's actually it's the time of day. It's the same as what you see in Union Square in New York.
I didn't know that. Now I know. I always wondered. That's actually really interesting.
Yep.
Chris, thank you so much. This is actually
Yeah.
really I'm really excited about eyelash AI. Um, and thank you for doing the interview. As always.
Please, let's do more. I appreciate.
Let's do it.
I
I'll take you up on that
Yeah.
for sure. Especially once the website is up, I'm gonna take you up on that.